So there are all different reasons and all different ways that our congregation and congregations are able to connect with different speakers. I'm going to start on a personal note and then get to the professional biography of our speaker, Ken Feinberg. So when I was 2 years old, I was in Beth L's nursery school in Bethesda, Maryland. And my mom, sitting right there, met another mom sitting right there, Dee Dee Feinberg. And my mom and Dee Dee became close friends because of dropping their kids off every day together at nursery school. And that developed into a friendship, and our families have been friends with, I knew them as Kenny and Dee Dee, but Ken, for many years. And they were at my bat mitzvah a few years ago. And several years ago, I picked up this incredible, moving, and profound book, What is Life Worth? The Unprecedented Effort to Compensate the Victims of 9/11, written, of course, by Ken Feinberg, who had the unenviable task of being responsible for dividing up the compensation for the victims' funds, not only for 9/11, but for so many different tragedies in our country, including the shootings at Virginia Tech, Aurora, Aurora, Colorado, the movie shootings, Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings, the Boston Marathon, and the BP, just to name a few. He also was the court-appointed special settlement master in 1999 to determine the fair market value of the original Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, and was one of 2 arbitrators selected to determine the allocation of legal fees in the Holocaust slave labor litigation. He's had a huge legal career, not only in Washington in particular, but at many universities, Harvard, Georgetown, Penn, NYU, University of Virginia, and Columbia. And of course, as I said, he wrote this book, What is Life Worth? There is no task that I can imagine greater than, Kenny, what you have had to do. And we know that this is not theoretical. In any community you go to, but especially in New York, this issue of victim compensation and the impact of 9/11 on families is personal. And I'm thinking about people in our community here who were impacted that day, and we think about them and their families, and all the families who have been impacted by the horrors in so many different ways in our country. And so we think about them just for a moment. What's profound for me is that part of who Ken and Dee Dee are is true Jewish volunteers' commitment to making this world a better place, not only through their work, but through their volunteerism, and the role that they have played, for me most personally, in the UJA, JFNA, whichever alphabet soup you want to use it, world, is something so important that they understand that being involved in the Jewish community is a reflection of who they are. And so proudly, when I think about what does it mean to decide what is life worth, if Jewish values can underlie those conversations, it means that this tradition that I am committed to, that you are committed to by being here, is not something theoretical. It's something that enters into who we are, that being Jewish, that studying Judaism, that building a Jewish community isn't something we just do in our spare time. But it's something we do that inhabits all of who we are. It doesn't mean that we necessarily come to shul every day, but there is no distinction between our Jewish self and our human self. That this idea of approaching what is a life worth, or how do we understand the world in which we live, is totally integrated with being a part of this 3,000-year-old Jewish tradition. And I am profoundly grateful and honored that Kenny will come to the Bima this morning to teach us. Following services, when we go downstairs for Kiddush, you'll be able to get some food, and then we'll do a question-answer downstairs. Ken Feinberg.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the rabbi for mentioning my book. Here it is. What is life worth? Now, you may have trouble finding this book today. Don't worry. My personal supply of this book is virtually inexhaustible. So if anybody has trouble finding the book, let the rabbi know. She's correct. This is sort of a Washington reunion. I've known the rabbi since she was a toddler in Washington. Her distinguished folks, Dr. Brent Ain, right here, noted doctor in the Washington area, and attorney Risa Ain, her folks, and I'm glad to see them again, friends of 40 years. My wife, Dee Feinberg, who some of you know is so active in so many Jewish causes around the globe, from Federation to Jaffe to JFNA to Hillel to everything. She's been such an active, committed Jew in terms of doing as much as she can to assist the Jewish people and the communities around the world. And when she confirmed that I should do this, it's a done deal. I have to be here, whatever she says. And as was said earlier, my good friend Jeff Schoenfeld, president of Federation right now, who I've known for many, many years, and for Jeff Schoenfeld to be here today is a special treat. He's doing so much right now for Federation here in New York, and I'm grateful that he's here as well. Every once in a while in American life, not often, doesn't happen very often, there is a tragedy. And the tragedy so overwhelms the American people that there is a hue and cry to do something special for the victims. 9/11, Sandy Hook, Boston Marathon, Virginia Tech. Policymakers decide, I don't decide this, policymakers decide that there ought to be special compensation just for those victims. Everybody else fend for yourself. But for those victims, the community is so galvanized and so determined to show the world that we take care of our own, that special compensation is established. Now, most of the time, that compensation is private. It comes from you and me, donors all over the United States. The world contribute money to help the victims and their families. Private donations. In the Boston Marathon a couple of years ago, in 60 days, $61 million came in from private donors. 100,000 donors around the country donated nickels and dimes and dollars to come up with a fund to pay the victims of the marathon bombings. Now, in the 9/11, 13 days after 9/11, Congress passed a law. And the law simply said that anybody who lost a loved one on 9/11, the airplanes, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, or anybody who was physically injured as a result of the terrorist attacks, could voluntarily, up to them, could voluntarily enter a special compensation fund funded by the American taxpayer. Taxpayer money, public money. You don't have to. If you want to litigate, if you want to go to court, hire a lawyer, sue the World Trade Center, sue the airlines, sue the Port Authority, sue the security card companies. But if you'd rather come into a special compensation program, you can do so. Well, 97% of all the families that lost a loved one on 9/11 voluntarily came into the program. President Bush asked me to design and administer that program. And we paid out in taxpayer money $7.1 billion over 33 months. Only 94 people decided not to take the money. They decided to file a lawsuit, and they all settled their cases 5 years later. There was never a trial on who was responsible for 9/11. The program worked just as Congress intended it work, diverting people out of the litigation, out of the courtroom, into a special compensation program where the taxpayer footed the bill. The program worked. Now, I've spent the last, 15 years almost, defending this program, 9/11. I believe it was the right thing to do. I believe it exhibited the best of the American character, the community rising up to help innocent victims and their families. It was good, sound public policy. Don't ever do it again. The 9/11 Fund is a precedent for nothing. It is a one-off, a response to a very unique American tragedy, 9/11. It'll never be replicated, nor should it. Before you think the 9/11 Fund is the wave of the future, you should have examined some of the emails I received when I was administering that program. Dear Mr. Feinberg, my son died in Oklahoma City. Where's my check? Dear Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. My daughter died in the basement of the World Trade Center in the original 1993 attacks committed by the very same type of people. Where's my check? And it wasn't just terrorism. Dear Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. Last year, my wife saved 3 little girls from drowning in the Mississippi River, and then she drowned a heroine. Where's my check? You better be careful about setting up with public money special programs for a select few. Everybody else, sorry, fend for yourself. But for you individuals, we have special arrangements, special compensation, elite treatment. Now, 9/11, I'll defend the law, one off. Not from the perspective of the victims, from the perspective of the country. It was the right thing to do. Don't do it again. All these other programs, Boston Marathon, Virginia Tech, that's all private money, you see. All private money. That's different. Now, I'm asked all the time, what's the toughest part of what you do, Ken Feinberg? Is it designing the program? No, it's not particularly difficult to design. There are people in this congregation like Schoenfeld that could do exactly what I do. It's not that difficult. Is it administering the program, calculating the damages? No. If you have an adding machine, that's pretty straightforward. The toughest part of what I do anytime there's a tragedy is dealing with the emotion of the victims and their families and their survivors. Now that is debilitating, you see. Because every time there is a tragedy, like Marathon, like 9/11, you have to invite any survivor who wants to come and see you to visit, one-on-one in private, what the rabbi does every day. And it is very, very difficult. Because you see, after tragedy, nobody comes to see me to talk about money. Nobody. They come for 2 reasons. One, to vent about life's unfairness. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my daughter at the World Trade Center. She was a first-year associate in a law firm, and now she's gone. Where is the justice? There is no God. No God could allow a tragedy that took my daughter, innocent. Try and explain that to me, Mr. Feinberg. You let people vent. You listen. There's very little you can say. Very little you can say. Or people come to see me to validate the memory of a lost loved one. Mr. Feinberg, I'm here to tell you I lost my wife at the World Trade Center. We were married for 25 years. And at this hearing now with you, I'd like to show you a video of our wedding 25 years ago. Well, Mr. Jones, you don't have to show me that video. It won't have any bearing on compensation. You're going to watch. I want you to see what those murderers did to my angel. Play the video. My room, my office, was filled with memorabilia. Diplomas, medals, certificates of good conduct, teddy bears, toys. People come to validate. They want somebody to listen about a memory, about a loved one that is no more. And the worst experience is when you listen to people who lament the fact that they lost a loved one and there is not even a body. The body was incinerated. There's not even a body to visit at the cemetery. It is astounding to me how that triggers an emotional reaction, the absence of a body. That's the tough part, you see. And whenever I take on one of these assignments, I say to myself, brace yourself. Brace yourself for what you're going to hear. Nobody ever comes to me to say thank you, gratitude, appreciation. That's not part of this. That's not expected, and you don't expect it. But the stories you hear from survivors are stranger than fiction. 24-year-old victim comes to see, 24-year-old lady came to see me after 9/11. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman, and he left me with our two children, 6 and 4. Now, you're going to give me about $2 million tax-free. I want it in 30 days. 30 days? Mrs. Jones, it may take me longer than 30 days. This is public money. I've got to go to the Treasury. They've got to do their due diligence. I've got to cut a check. 30 days, I want my check. Why, Mrs. Jones? Why do you need the money in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why, Mr. Feinberg. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to take care of our two children, 6 and 4. Now they're going to be orphans. While I still have my faculties, I've got to get this money. I've got to set up a trust to take care of the two children who now will not have a mother or a father. Well, we accelerated at Treasury. We raced to get the money. Got the money and gave it to her. 8 weeks later, she died. It is unbelievable, the stories. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center, a fireman. When the plane hit the building, he ran into that World Trade Center and rescued 20 people from the lobby and brought them to safety to Lower Broadway. He saw that there were another 20 people trapped. He ran back into the building a second time and brought them to safety. While he was running across the World Trade Center plaza, he was killed when somebody jumped from the 103rd floor and hit him, killing them both. Had he taken one step either way, he'd be here today. There is no God, Mr. Feinberg, that would allow this to happen. One step either way and he'd be here. Instead, they both died. Explain it to me. There's no explanation. And you're constantly asked to make Solomonic judgments. I'll give you one more example. A lady came to see me after 9/11, sobbing. I thought she was going to collapse in my office. And she said, Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband at the World Trade Center. He was a fireman. He was Mr. Mom, and he left me with our 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. Mr. Mom, every day that he wasn't at the firehouse, he was home teaching the 6-year-old how to play baseball, teaching the 4-year-old how to read, reading a bedtime story to the 2-year-old. What a cook! Mr. Feinberg, he was Mr. Mom. He cooked all my meals. He was the gardener around the house. He was my best friend. The only reason I haven't jumped out a window to join him are our 3 kids. But Mr. Feinberg, it doesn't matter how much money you give me, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. It doesn't matter. My life is over without Mr. Mom, my husband. It's over. And I'll never be the same no matter what. She leaves. The next day, I get a telephone call from a lawyer in Queens. Mr. Feinberg, did you meet yesterday with the lady married to Mr. Mom with the 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2? I said, yep, terrible. He goes, now look, Mr. Feinberg, you got a tough job. I don't envy what you have to do, but I have to tell you something, Mr. Feinberg. She doesn't know that Mr. Mom has 2 other kids by his girlfriend in Queens, 5 and 3. And I'm telling you this because when you cut your check from the 9/11 fund, there's not 3 surviving children, there's 5 surviving children. But I'm sure you'll do the right thing, click, he hangs up. Do you tell her? Do you tell her about the other kids? You want to ask Dee Dee Feinberg what keeps me up at 3 a.m. Dee Dee, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do, Dee Dee? Keep your mouth shut. She has a memory of her husband. Leave it alone. She's already under enough grief. Now, that was 15 years ago. I'll bet you by now they know. But I cut 1 check to the wife and the 3 kids, and without her knowledge, I cut a separate check to the girlfriend as the guardian of the 2 kids, you see. Now you ask, what makes the job debilitating? That the psychic pressure in listening and empathizing to people. And you gotta be careful what you say to people in grief. They are vulnerable, and you better be careful. Silence is better. I remember one time an 82-year-old man came to me in Washington, crying. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my son on 9/11 at the Pentagon. When the plane hit, he escaped, safe. But he thought his sister, who also worked at the Pentagon, was trapped. So he went back into the burning building to look for her. She had escaped through a side door. He died looking for her. And then this old man said to me, crying, my life is over, Mr. Feinberg. A father should not bury a son. My life is over. And I said to him without thinking, and I said, Mr. Jones, this is terrible. I know how you feel. He looked at me. Mr. Feinberg, I want to give you some friendly advice. You've got a tough job. Don't ever tell somebody like me that you know how I feel. You have no idea how I feel. And it's condescending, and you shouldn't say it. Well, I'll never make that mistake again. Now, what does all of this have to do with Jewish values? Well, I can say very, very simply. I can tell you this. In terms of deciding how much money should be given or awarded to a victim, Jewish books of learning don't help me very much. I went to the Union Theological Seminary after 9/11, and I asked a couple of rabbis at the Union Theological Seminary, give me some advice. on how to compensate, on how to divide up money, on how to decide who gets what. And the rabbis, they said to me, Mr. Feinberg, there's very little we can tell you in Jewish books of learning. There are certain horrors in life where Judaism or any religion can't provide you too much guidance other than the general rules about compassion and sensitivity. We can't help you on that. Don't expect Jewish books of learning to provide you some silver bullet or some simple answer. You know, we can recite some parables about horses and dividing up property, but it won't help you very much. It won't. But they did give me some very valuable advice about grieving, which I found to be extremely productive and constructive. Remember, Mr. Feinberg, that in your secular role in compensating and showing how the community comes to the rescue of those innocent victims, take solace from Jewish ritual when it comes to grieving. There we are experts. There we are experts over centuries. Because Judaism demonstrates and teaches that the individual in grief never, ever grieves alone. The community rallies around that victim and that grieving individual, guarding the body before burial. A community-wide demonstration of solidarity with the victim at the service. And at the grave, it is the community, not only the individual, who comes to that grave to participate, not observe, to participate in that service. And the Shiva, perhaps the most important part of the entire ritual, where the community, in an ecumenical way, comes to the aid of the victim and the families by rallying around that victim and letting the victim know that the community is there for him and for her. Now, this might be very, very simplistic, but it is essential to understanding how, after 9/11, the Boston Marathon, any of these tragedies, it is the community, not one donor or one individual. It is a community-wide expression of solidarity to sort of circle the wagons around the victim and his family or her family and help the survivors move on as best they can. And it provides great solace and is an essential part of the post-tragedy that the community is there. And I must say, in these programs that I have administered at the request of the presidents or governors or mayors or the Congress, you are reinforced in your determination to do a good job, knowing that these programs are apolitical. They are a community-wide expression of consensus, there but for fortune do other victims stand or lie. And that is why I think my Jewish heritage and my Jewish sensitivity about grief is very, very valuable. So again, I want to thank the rabbi, and I want to thank this congregation. My wife, Dee Dee, who's been to hundreds of congregations around the world, she said, you know, I have never been in a congregation for a service where people are so friendly and so outreaching and welcoming. So it is a particular honor for me, with toddler Rabbi Ain here, and her folks, long-standing friends, doctor and attorney, and Mr. Schoenfeld. So it is a particular honor for me, and believe me, folks, I'll find you a copy of this. It's not that difficult. We'll manage to find you copies, and inscribe it, too. So thank you.